The blood still stained her traveling dress when Marguerite Vale stumbled into the mission church outside San Antonio, Texas, her hands shaking as she pressed them against the heavy wooden door. Father Miguel looked up from his evening prayers, his weathered face creasing with concern as he took in the sight of the young woman. Her dark auburn hair tangled with dust and dried sweat, her green eyes wide with a terror that spoke of things no person should witness. "Please," she gasped, her voice breaking. "They killed everyone. The stage, the driver, the other passengers. I hid under the luggage, and when they left, I ran." The old priest rose quickly, guiding her to a bench as she collapsed against it. "I need to get to Sweetwater. My aunt, she is all I have left in this world." Father Miguel brought her water, his movements gentle as he assessed the situation. It was August 1878, and the territory between San Antonio and Sweetwater was notoriously dangerous. Bandits, renegades, and desperate men made the journey treacherous for any traveler, but especially for a woman alone. The priest's eyes moved to the simple black habit hanging on a hook near the vestry, intended for Sister Catherine, who would arrive next month from the east. "You cannot travel as you are," he said quietly. "A woman alone will attract the wrong kind of attention. But a nun, a bride of Christ traveling to minister to the faithful, she might pass unmolested." Marguerite understood his meaning immediately, and though the deception sat uneasily in her heart, the memory of gunfire and screaming passengers made her nod. 2 days later, dressed in the black habit with a simple wooden cross around her neck, Marguerite boarded the morning stage to Sweetwater. Her transformation was complete, her copper hair hidden beneath the white wimple, her posture straight and serene despite the hammering of her heart. The other passengers, a merchant and his wife, treated her with respectful distance. The driver, a grizzled man named Pete, touched his hat but said little. Everything seemed as safe as such a journey could be until they stopped to change horses at a way station 30 miles outside of San Antonio. That was when Ethan James walked into her life. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with sun-bronzed skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at the collar of his worn shirt. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the prairie, and they settled on Marguerite with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore dusty leather chaps over his pants, a faded bandana tied loosely around his neck, and a gun belt that looked well used but carefully maintained. A cowboy, clearly, probably working one of the ranches that dotted the territory. "Sister," he said, his voice a low drawl as he touched the brim of his hat. But there was something in those eyes, something knowing that made Marguerite's stomach clench with sudden fear. He looked at her not with the polite deference the other passengers showed, but with a sharp awareness that suggested he saw more than a woman in religious garb. "Sir," she replied, keeping her voice soft and measured as Father Miguel had coached her, "may God bless your travels." "And yours, sister." But the slight emphasis on the title made sweat prick at the back of her neck. He knew. Somehow this stranger knew she was no nun. Ethan James watched the woman in the black habit climb back into the stage, and he rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. He had grown up with 3 sisters, all of whom had attended the mission school in El Paso. He knew nuns, knew their mannerisms, their particular way of moving through the world with practiced grace. This woman, for all her attempts at serenity, held herself with the tension of a hunted creature. Her hands, glimpsed briefly as she adjusted her habit, showed no signs of the rough work that characterized most women of faith in this territory. Her skin was too soft, her movements too uncertain. More telling was the way her eyes had darted to the horizon every few moments, searching for threats. Nuns traveled with purpose but without fear, their faith a shield against the dangers of the world. This woman was terrified. He should have ridden on. His business was in Sweetwater, delivering a prize bull to the Carmichael Ranch, and he was already 2 days behind schedule. But something about the fear in those green eyes, quickly masked but unmistakable, kept him from mounting his horse. Instead, he approached the station master. "That stage heading to Sweetwater?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yep. Due in 3 days if the weather holds and the Comanche do not get restless." "I will ride escort," Ethan said, handing over a few coins. "Tell Pete I will keep pace about 100 yards back." The station master raised an eyebrow but pocketed the money without comment. It was not unusual for travelers to hire additional protection, though most arranged it beforehand. Still, business was business, and Pete would welcome an extra gun if trouble found them. As the stage rolled out, Ethan mounted his roan gelding and settled into an easy pace behind it. He told himself he was simply being cautious, that a nun traveling these roads deserved protection. But he knew the truth. Something about the woman drew him, mystery and vulnerability wrapped in holy vestments. And if his suspicions were correct, if she was hiding from something or someone, then she was in more danger than she realized. The first day passed without incident. The stage made good time across the flat prairie, stopping briefly at midday to rest the horses. Marguerite remained in character, declining food, and instead praying quietly with her rosary beads, though Ethan noticed she fumbled occasionally with the sequence. When she caught him watching from his position near the horses, she quickly looked away, but not before he saw the flash of panic in her eyes. That evening they stopped at a larger way station, one with rooms for rent and a decent meal available. The merchant and his wife retired early, exhausted from the rough roads. Pete checked the stage and tended to the team. Marguerite sat alone at a corner table, picking at a plate of beans and cornbread, her wimple still firmly in place despite the heat. Ethan debated with himself for a long moment before crossing the room to her table. "Sister, may I join you?" he asked, his voice pitched low enough that the few other patrons could not hear. She tensed but nodded, her eyes fixed on her plate. "Of course." He sat across from her, studying her face in the lamplight. Up close, she was younger than he had first thought, probably no more than 22 or 23. There was a delicacy to her features, a refinement that spoke of education and comfort, not the harsh life of frontier missions. A small scar marked her left temple, fresh enough to still be pink against her pale skin. "You are not a nun," he said simply. The color drained from her face and her hands clenched in her lap. "I do not know what you mean. You fumble your prayers. You hold yourself like someone expecting an attack, and your hands have never scrubbed floors or worked a garden." He leaned forward slightly. "I am not going to expose you, but if you are running from something, pretending to be a bride of Christ will only protect you so far." Tears welled in her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. "Please," she whispered. "I just need to reach Sweetwater. My aunt is there. I will be safe with her." "What are you running from?" When she did not answer, he tried again. "I cannot help if I do not know what we are dealing with." She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the war playing out behind her eyes, the desperate need to trust battling against fear. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "Bandits attacked our stage 4 days ago. They killed everyone. The driver, the guard, the other passengers. I only survived because I hid. When I got to the mission, Father Miguel said a woman alone would never make it across the territory, so he gave me this." She gestured to the habit. "I know it is wrong to deceive people this way, but I had no choice." Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct he had not experienced since his younger sisters had left home. "You are heading to Sweetwater?" "Yes. My aunt, Mrs. Dorothy Vale, runs a boarding house there. She is the only family I have left." "I know Dorothy," Ethan said, and relief flooded Marguerite's face. "Good woman. Tough as nails but kind-hearted." He made a decision then, one that would complicate his life considerably but felt unavoidable. "I am heading to Sweetwater myself. I will make sure you get there safely." "You would do that, even knowing I am deceiving everyone. You are trying to survive," he said simply. "Nothing wrong with that, but you should know if there are men hunting you specifically, the habit will not stop them forever." "They do not know me," she said quickly. "The bandits, I mean. They never saw me. I am not running from them. I just need to cross the territory without becoming a target." He wanted to believe her, but something in her tone suggested there was more to the story. Still, pushing her now would only make her retreat further. "All right," he said. "But you should stay close to the stage from now on, and if anything feels wrong, you find me immediately." "Understood," she nodded, and for the first time since he had seen her, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. "Thank you, Mr. James, Ethan James." "Thank you, Ethan. I am." She hesitated, then decided to trust him with at least this much truth. Marguerite Vale. "Pleased to meet you, Marguerite." He stood, touching his hat. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." As he walked away, he felt her eyes on his back, and he wondered what he had gotten himself into. But when he thought of those green eyes filled with fear and desperate hope, he knew he would see this through, wherever it led. The second day dawned hot and cloudless, the sun beating down on the prairie with relentless intensity. Inside the stage, the merchant's wife fanned herself constantly, complaining about the heat until her husband finally snapped at her to be quiet. Marguerite kept her silence, though Ethan, riding alongside now rather than behind, could see the way she pressed a handkerchief to her neck, trying to cool the skin beneath the layers of her costume. At the midday stop, he approached her with his canteen. "You need to drink more," he said. "Heat exhaustion is a real danger out here." She took the canteen gratefully, drinking deeply before returning it. "I am not used to this climate," she admitted. "I grew up in Philadelphia. We had hot summers, but nothing like this." "Philadelphia," he repeated, "long way from home." "My parents died last year," she said, staring out at the endless stretch of prairie. "Yellow fever. My aunt wrote to me, invited me to come west and help her with the boarding house. I thought it would be an adventure." She laughed bitterly. "I was a fool." "You are not a fool," Ethan said firmly. "You are brave. Most people would have fallen apart after what you went through, but you are still fighting, still moving forward. That takes courage." She looked at him then, really seeing him for perhaps the first time. He was handsome in a rugged way, his features strong and weathered by sun and wind. But it was his eyes that caught her, the kindness and strength she saw there. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You do not know me. For all you know, I could be a criminal myself." "Are you?" "No." "Then that is all I need to know." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, less guarded. "Besides, I like your aunt. Dorothy took me in when I first came to Sweetwater 5 years ago, gave me a job at the boarding house until I could save enough to start working the ranches." "I owe her 5 years," Marguerite mused. "You must be about my age then. 25. 26, he corrected. "You?" 22, though after the past week I feel ancient." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the heat shimmering off the ground around them. Then Pete called out that they were moving on, and Marguerite reluctantly climbed back into the stifling stage. The trouble came just after sunset. They were crossing through a narrow canyon, the walls rising steep and red on either side, when Ethan saw movement on the ridge above. His hand went to his rifle even as he called out a warning. "Pete, riders!" The driver cracked his whip, urging the team to greater speed, but they were already tired from the long day. The stage lurched forward as gunfire echoed off the canyon walls. Inside, the merchant's wife screamed. Marguerite pressed herself against the floor, memories of the earlier attack flooding back with paralyzing force. Ethan wheeled his horse around, firing up at the ridge. He counted 4 men, maybe 5, their faces obscured by bandanas. They were not trying to kill anyone yet, just trying to stop the stage. Bandits, then, after money and valuables. One of the attackers rode down from the ridge, cutting off the path ahead. Pete had no choice but to haul on the reins, bringing the team to a shuddering stop. Ethan positioned himself between the stage and the approaching riders, his rifle trained on the leader. "That is far enough," he called out. The lead bandit laughed, a harsh sound. "1 man against 5. You are either very brave or very stupid, Cowboy." "Probably a bit of both," Ethan admitted. "But you are not taking this stage. We do not want trouble. Just throw down the strongbox and any valuables and we will be on our way." "There is no strongbox," Pete called from his perch. "Just passengers trying to get to Sweetwater." The bandit's eyes narrowed and he urged his horse closer. "Then we will take what the passengers have. Everyone out." Marguerite's heart hammered as the stage door opened. The merchant helped his wife down, the woman still sobbing hysterically. Marguerite forced herself to stand, to walk out into the fading light with her head high and her hands folded as a nun should. When the bandits saw her, several of them shifted uncomfortably. "A nun," one of them muttered. "Bad luck to rob a nun." But the leader was unmoved. "Habit does not make her any less of a passenger. Check them all." One of the bandits approached Marguerite, reaching for the small bag she carried. She clutched it tighter, knowing the rosary inside was borrowed and would reveal her deception if examined too closely. "Please," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "I carry nothing of value, only items for prayer." "Let me see," the bandit insisted, grabbing the bag. That was when Ethan moved. He spurred his horse forward, his rifle swinging up in a smooth motion. "I said you are not taking this stage." The lead bandit went for his gun, but Ethan was faster. A single shot rang out, kicking up dust at the bandit's horse's feet. The animal reared, dumping its rider unceremoniously to the ground. Before the others could react, Ethan had already chambered another round, his aim now on the second closest man. "Next one goes through a knee," he said calmly. "You all have about 3 seconds to decide if whatever is in these people's pockets is worth permanent injury." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the leader, still on the ground, raised his hands. All right. No need for anyone to get hurt. We are leaving. Smart choice." Ethan kept his rifle trained on them as they gathered their horses and rode back the way they had come, the leader limping slightly as he mounted. Only when they had disappeared over the ridge did he lower his weapon, his hands remarkably steady. The merchant rushed forward, pumping Ethan's hand enthusiastically. "Incredible shooting, sir. Absolutely incredible. We would have been robbed blind without you." But Ethan was not looking at the merchant. His eyes found Marguerite, who stood frozen where the bandit had left her, her bag clutched to her chest. He dismounted and walked over to her, his voice gentle. "Are you all right?" She nodded, but he could see the tremor in her hands. "I thought. When he grabbed my bag, I thought. I know." He wanted to pull her into his arms to comfort her, but was acutely aware of the watching eyes. Instead, he simply said, "You are safe. I will not let anything happen to you." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection forged in danger and trust. Marguerite felt it like a physical thing, warming her from the inside despite the cooling evening air. This man, this stranger who had no reason to care about her fate, had just risked his life to protect her. And in that moment, she realized that her feelings toward him were shifting into something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified her. They made camp that night at the mouth of the canyon, everyone too shaken to continue in the darkness. Pete built a fire while the merchant tended to his wife, who had finally stopped crying. Marguerite sat slightly apart, staring into the flames when Ethan settled beside her. "You were thinking quickly back there," he said. "Staying calm, not panicking. That is not easy to do." "I learned during the first attack," she said quietly. "Panic gets you killed. Still, you did well." He paused, then added, "I meant what I said. I will not let anything happen to you." She turned to look at him, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "Why do you care so much? You could have just ridden on, let the bandits take what they wanted." "Because I have seen too much suffering in this territory," he said simply. "Too many good people hurt by bad ones, and because—" He hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Because from the moment I saw you, I felt like I needed to protect you. I cannot explain it better than that." Marguerite's breath caught. No man had ever spoken to her with such raw honesty. "I feel it too," she whispered. "That connection. It frightens me." "Why?" "Because I barely know you, and because everything in my life has fallen apart. How can I trust these feelings when everything else has proven so fragile?" Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. It was a bold gesture, one that would be scandalous if anyone noticed, but in the darkness beyond the fire's light they were alone. "You can trust this," he said. "You can trust me. I will prove it to you however long it takes." She looked down at their joined hands, his rough and calloused, hers soft despite the trials of recent days. It felt right, this connection between them. It felt like the first solid thing she had experienced since her world had shattered. "I want to believe that," she said. "Then do." He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Get some rest. We will reach Sweetwater tomorrow evening." As Marguerite lay down near the fire, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, she found herself thinking not of the attacks or the danger that still surrounded them, but of gray-blue eyes and a quiet promise. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. The final day of their journey dawned clear and bright. The merchant and his wife, eager to reach Sweetwater after the previous day's excitement, were unusually quiet. Pete pushed the team hard, wanting to make up for lost time. And Marguerite found her eyes constantly drifting to the window, watching Ethan ride alongside the stage. He caught her looking once and smiled, a private expression meant only for her. She felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked away quickly, but not before returning the smile. The habit felt even more constricting now, not just physically but emotionally. It was a barrier between them, a lie she was maintaining but that he saw through completely. They stopped at noon to rest the horses, and Ethan helped Marguerite down from the stage, his hands lingering a moment longer than strictly necessary at her waist. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "Better now that we are almost there." She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then added, "Though I confess I will be glad to shed this costume. It feels wrong continuing the deception." "You have done what you needed to survive," he reminded her. "No shame in that, perhaps. But I worry what my aunt will think when she learns what I have done." "Dorothy will understand. She is practical, always has been. She will just be glad you are safe." They stood close together in the shade of a cottonwood tree, the rest of the party busy with their own concerns. Marguerite studied Ethan's face, memorizing the details, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "What will happen when we reach Sweetwater?" she asked. "You will go back to your work, I suppose." "The Carmichael Ranch is just outside town," he said. "I will be delivering the bull, but I stay at Dorothy's when I am not working, so I will be around." He paused, then said carefully, "If you want me to be." "I do," she said, the words coming out more quickly than she intended. "Want you to be around, I mean. I would like to know you better. The real you, not just the protector who has kept me safe. And I want to know the real you," he said. "Not the frightened refugee or the fake nun, but Marguerite Vale, the woman from Philadelphia who came west looking for a new life." "She is still figuring out who she is," Marguerite admitted. "Everything has happened so fast, but I think I would like to discover that with you." Before Ethan could respond, Pete called out that they were moving on. The moment broke, but as Ethan helped Marguerite back into the stage, he leaned close and whispered, "We will have time. I promise you that." Sweetwater appeared on the horizon just after 5 o'clock, a cluster of buildings rising from the prairie like a mirage. Marguerite pressed her face to the window, taking in her first view of the town that would be her new home. It was larger than she had expected, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church with a white steeple, and numerous houses spreading out in all directions. She could see a school, a general store, a blacksmith, and at least 3 saloons. "There," Ethan called, pointing to a large 2-story building painted a cheerful yellow. "That is Dorothy's place, Sweetwater boarding house." As the stage rolled to a stop in front of the boarding house, the front door flew open and a woman emerged. Dorothy Vale was in her early 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple calico dress and an apron, and her face lit up when she saw the figure in the nun's habit emerging from the stage. "Marguerite," she called, hurrying forward. "Oh, my dear girl, I have been so worried. When the stage you were supposed to be on never arrived, I feared the worst." Marguerite rushed into her aunt's arms, the first genuine embrace she had experienced since her parents' deaths. "Aunt Dorothy," she said, her voice muffled against the older woman's shoulder. "I am so sorry to have worried you." Dorothy pulled back, studying her niece's face. Her eyes took in the habit, the wimple, and her expression grew puzzled. "But why are you dressed as a nun? Your letter said nothing about joining a religious order." Marguerite glanced at Ethan, who had dismounted and was standing a respectful distance away. "It is a long story. Perhaps we could discuss it inside." Of course. Dorothy turned and spotted Ethan, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Ethan James, I should have known you would be mixed up in this somehow. Did you escort my niece?" "Something like that," Ethan said, touching his hat. "It is good to see you, Dorothy. You are looking well." "And you are still a charmer," Dorothy said, but her tone was affectionate. "Come inside, both of you. Marguerite clearly has a story to tell, and I suspect you are part of it, Ethan." The boarding house's front parlor was welcoming and comfortable, with worn but clean furniture and lace curtains at the windows. Dorothy shooed away her other boarders, insisting they needed privacy, and then sat down to hear Marguerite's tale. It all came out then: the attack on the first stage, the deaths of the other passengers, her flight to the mission, and Father Miguel's suggestion that she travel in disguise. Dorothy listened without interruption, her face growing more grave as the story unfolded. When Marguerite reached the part about the second attack and Ethan's intervention, Dorothy turned to look at the cowboy with new appreciation. "You saved her life," she said simply. "I did what anyone would do," Ethan protested. "No, you did what a good man does," Dorothy corrected. "Most people would have ridden on, not wanting to get involved. You put yourself at risk for someone you did not even know." She stood and crossed to him, taking his hand in both of hers. "Thank you, Ethan. Thank you for bringing my niece home safely." "You are welcome," he said, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "I am just glad she is safe now." "As am I." Dorothy turned back to Marguerite. "Now, let us get you out of that habit and into proper clothes. I have your room all ready. And then, Young lady, you are going to eat a decent meal and get some proper rest." As Marguerite stood to follow her aunt upstairs, she paused and looked back at Ethan. "Will I see you again tomorrow?" he promised. "I need to deliver the bull to the Carmichael place, but I will be back tomorrow evening. If that is all right with you, Dorothy, my door is always open to you, Ethan James. You know that." Dorothy's eyes moved between her niece and the cowboy, and a small, knowing smile touched her lips. "I suspect you two have more to discuss." After they left, Ethan stood alone in the parlor for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. He had delivered Marguerite safely, fulfilled his self-appointed duty. He should feel relieved, ready to move on to his next job. But instead, he felt a strange reluctance to leave, a pull back toward the young woman who had stumbled into his life dressed as a nun. He knew what this feeling was, had felt it once before years ago with a girl in El Paso. But that had been youthful infatuation, quickly burned out when she had chosen a banker over a rough cowboy. This was different. Marguerite was different. There was a strength in her, a resilience that drew him like a magnet. And the way she looked at him, with those green eyes full of trust and something deeper, made him want to be worthy of that gaze. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow he would come back, and they would have a chance to talk without the urgency of danger, without the pretense of the nun's habit. Tomorrow he would begin to truly know Marguerite Vale, and with any luck, she would want to know him in return. The Carmichael Ranch sprawled across several thousand acres of prime grazing land north of Sweetwater. Ethan delivered the bull just after dawn, staying long enough to ensure the animal settled into its new home before collecting his payment. Jacob Carmichael, the ranch owner, tried to convince him to stay for breakfast, but Ethan declined politely. He had somewhere else he needed to be. Back in town, he stopped at the general store and bought a few items, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. Flowers seemed too forward, but he purchased a small bag of peppermint candies, remembering how Marguerite had mentioned missing the sweets from Philadelphia. He also bought a new shirt, reasoning that he should look presentable if he was going to court Dorothy Vale's niece. Court. The word settled in his mind with surprising ease. Yes, that was exactly what he intended to do. Court Marguerite properly, give her time to adjust to her new life while making his intentions clear. The territory was no place for games or uncertainty. If a man found a woman worth having, he pursued her honestly and directly. When he arrived at the boarding house that evening, freshly washed and wearing his new dark blue shirt, Dorothy answered the door with a knowing gleam in her eye. "She is in the garden," she said without preamble. "Around the back. And Ethan, be patient with her. She has been through a lot." "I know," he said. "I will be careful." The boarding house's garden was a small oasis of green in the dusty town, with vegetables growing in neat rows and a few hardy flowers blooming along the fence. Marguerite sat on a bench in the shade, wearing a simple yellow dress that made her hair glow like burnished copper. She had left it down, the long waves cascading over her shoulders, and Ethan felt his breath catch at the sight. She looked up as he approached, and a smile lit her face. "You came back. I said I would." He settled onto the bench beside her, leaving a respectable distance between them. "How are you feeling? Did you rest well?" "Better than I have in days," she admitted. "Aunt Dorothy has been wonderful. She does not judge me for the deception with the habit. She said survival requires difficult choices sometimes. She is a wise woman." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the evening sounds of the town settling in for the night. Then Marguerite said, "I realized I know almost nothing about you. Where are you from? How did you end up in Texas?" Ethan leaned back, his eyes on the darkening sky. "I grew up in Colorado, On a small ranch my father tried to make work. It failed when I was 15, and he moved the family to El Paso to start over. I worked odd jobs for a few years, learned ranching from some of the old hands. When I turned 21, I decided to strike out on my own, see more of the territory. That is when I ended up here in Sweetwater. Your family, are they still in El Paso? My parents are. My 3 sisters all married and scattered across the territory. We write occasionally, but I have not seen them in a couple of years. You miss them? Sometimes, he admitted. But I like my life here. It is honest work and the people are good. I have never been one for settling in one place too long, but Sweetwater feels like home now. Marguerite played with a fold of her skirt, gathering her courage. And has there been anyone special in your life? A woman, I mean. Ethan turned to look at her, and the directness in his gaze made her heart skip. There was a girl in El Paso years ago, but it was not serious, not really. Since then, I have been focused on building my reputation, saving money. I always figured the right woman would come along when the time was right. And now, she whispered, now I think maybe she has. He reached over and took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing. Marguerite, I know we barely know each other. I know you have been through hell and need time to recover. But I want you to know my intentions. I want to court you properly if you will have me. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were happy ones. I want that too. These feelings, they are so sudden, so unexpected. But they feel real, more real than anything I have experienced. They are real, he assured her. Sometimes people spend years together and never find what we have found in a few days. I am not saying we rush into anything. I am just saying we give this a chance, see where it leads. Yes, she said, squeezing his hand. Yes, I would like that very much. They sat together in the gathering twilight, hands joined, talking about everything and nothing. Marguerite told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her parents and their quiet life before the fever took them. She spoke of her education, her love of reading, her dreams of adventure that had seemed so foolish after the stage attack. Ethan listened intently, asking questions, learning the shape of her mind and heart. In turn, he shared stories from his years on the trail, the strange characters he had met, the beauty of the wide open spaces. He told her about his dreams too, of eventually owning his own small spread, raising horses maybe, building something that would last. It sounds wonderful, Marguerite said wistfully. A home, a place to belong. I have felt untethered since my parents died, like I was drifting without anchor. You have an anchor now, he said. You have Dorothy and you have me if you want me. I want you, she said simply, and the honesty in her voice made his heart swell. When he finally left, well after dark, they had established an understanding. He would continue his work but would visit as often as he could. She would help Dorothy with the boarding house, learning the business and settling into her new life. And they would take their time, building their relationship on a foundation of trust and genuine affection, rather than rushing toward anything. But as Ethan walked back to the small room he rented above the livery stable, he knew with certainty that Marguerite Vale was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. The territory had a way of making things clear, stripping away pretense and forcing people to face truth. And his truth was that he had found something precious, something worth fighting for. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Ethan took short-term jobs around Sweetwater, reluctant to accept anything that would take him far from town. He repaired fences for the Carmichael Ranch, helped break horses for the cavalry post, and even did some carpentry work for the growing number of homesteaders settling in the area. Every evening, he would appear at the boarding house, and he and Marguerite would spend hours together. Sometimes they walked through town, Marguerite getting to know the shops and people. Other times they sat in Dorothy's garden, talking as the stars came out. And occasionally, Dorothy would allow them to sit in the parlor unchaperoned, though never for long. Marguerite blossomed in this new environment. The fear that had shadowed her eyes gradually faded, replaced by a vibrant curiosity about her surroundings. She threw herself into helping Dorothy, learning to cook the hearty meals the boarders expected, managing the accounts with her Philadelphia education, and even taking on some of the heavier cleaning work. The town embraced her quickly. The minister's wife, Mrs. Patterson, invited her to join the ladies' auxiliary. The schoolteacher, Miss Harper, asked for her help organizing the fall social. And gradually, Marguerite found herself building a network of friendships, a community that made Sweetwater feel like home. But it was her time with Ethan that she treasured most. With him, she could be completely herself, no pretense or facade necessary. He had seen her at her most vulnerable and had not turned away. Instead, he had offered strength and protection without asking anything in return. One evening in late September, nearly 2 months after her arrival, they sat on the porch swing at the boarding house, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. Ethan had his arm around her shoulders, a liberty Dorothy had finally permitted after weeks of proper courting. "I received a letter from Jacob Carmichael today," Ethan said quietly. "He is offering me a permanent position as his foreman, good pay, a cabin on the property, real stability." Marguerite turned to look at him. "That is wonderful. You have wanted this, haven't you? A steady position." "I have," he admitted. "But there is more to it than just the job. Jacob knows I have been courting you. He mentioned that the cabin is big enough for a family when the time comes." Her breath caught. "Ethan." "I am not proposing," he said quickly. "Not yet. I know we need more time and I want to do this right. But I wanted you to know that I am thinking about our future, about building something permanent, together." Marguerite leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I think about it too," she confessed. "About what it would be like to be your wife, to build a life with you. It does not frighten me the way I thought it would. Instead, it feels like coming home. You are home," he murmured against her hair. "You have been from the moment we met." They sat in comfortable silence, the evening sounds of Sweetwater washing over them. A dog barked in the distance. Someone played a fiddle at the saloon down the street. A child's laughter rang out from a nearby house. It was ordinary and beautiful, a life Marguerite had never imagined but now could not imagine living without. "When will you give Jacob your answer?" she asked. "I already did. I accepted." He pulled back to look at her face. "I hope that is all right. I should have discussed it with you first." "No," she said, touching his face gently. "You made the right choice. This is your life, your career. I am honored that you considered me in making the decision, but you do not owe me explanations." "I will always consider you," he said seriously, "in every decision, every choice. Because you are part of my life now, Marguerite, the most important part." She kissed him then, a soft, sweet kiss that spoke of promise and hope. It was not their first kiss, but still made her heart race. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily. "I know it has not been long, but I know what I feel. I love you, Ethan James." "I love you too," he said, kissing her again. "And I am going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Inside the house, Dorothy watched through the parlor window and allowed herself a satisfied smile. She had known from the moment Ethan had brought Marguerite home that something special was developing between them. Her niece had been through hell, but had found heaven in the most unlikely place. And Ethan, that good, steady young man, had finally found someone worthy of the love he had to give. The fall social was held in early October, a tradition meant to celebrate the harvest and bring the community together before winter. The whole town turned out, farmers and ranchers, merchants and laborers, all gathering in the church's assembly hall for food, music, and dancing. Marguerite wore a new dress for the occasion, a dark green that brought out her eyes. Dorothy had insisted on making it, saying every young woman needed at least one beautiful dress. As Marguerite looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the frightened refugee who had stumbled into San Antonio. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different life. Ethan called for her at 6 o'clock, dressed in his Sunday best, his hair freshly trimmed. Dorothy opened the door and laughed at the expression on his face when he saw Marguerite descending the stairs. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice slightly awed. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Marguerite teased, taking his offered arm. The social was everything she had hoped for. The food was plentiful, the music lively. Ethan proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, guiding her through reels and waltzes with easy confidence. Between dances, they mingled with the crowd, Marguerite introducing Ethan to people she had met through Dorothy's boarding house. Jacob Carmichael found them during a break in the music. "Ethan, Mrs. Vale," he said, nodding politely. "Wonderful evening." "It is indeed," Marguerite agreed. "Thank you for giving Ethan the foreman position, Mr. Carmichael. He is very excited about it." "Well, he has earned it." "Best hand I have got, and smart to boot." Jacob paused, then said, "I hope you will be happy on the ranch, Mrs. Vale. My wife, Elizabeth, is looking forward to having another woman nearby. It gets lonely out there sometimes." Marguerite glanced at Ethan, whose ears had turned slightly red. "I am sure it will be lovely," she said diplomatically. After Jacob moved on, she turned to Ethan with raised eyebrows. "Does the whole town know you are planning to marry me?" "Probably," he admitted. "Sweetwater is not exactly known for keeping secrets. Does it bother you?" "No," she said, surprising herself. "It feels nice, actually, like we belong to each other already." "We do," he said simply. "We have since the moment I saw you at that way station." As the evening wore on, Marguerite found herself swept into conversations with various townspeople. Mrs. Patterson praised her work with the ladies' auxiliary. Miss Harper asked if she would consider helping teach reading to the younger children. Even the gruff blacksmith, Mr. Morrison, stopped to tell her how much his wife enjoyed having her at their weekly quilting circle. This, Marguerite realized, was what she had been searching for without knowing it. Not adventure or excitement, but community. Belonging. A place where people knew her name and cared about her life. In Philadelphia, she had been comfortable but isolated after her parents' deaths. Here in Sweetwater, she was part of something larger than herself. Late in the evening, as the crowd began to thin, Ethan led Marguerite outside for some fresh air. The night was cool and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. They walked a short distance from the church, far enough for privacy but still within the bounds of propriety. "I have been thinking," Ethan said, stopping beneath a large oak tree, "about timing and doing things right. But watching you tonight, seeing how happy you are, how you have made this town your home, I realized something." "What is that?" Marguerite asked, her heart beginning to race. "That waiting is just a way of being afraid, and I am not afraid, not anymore." He took both her hands in his. "Marguerite Vale, I know we have not been courting for very long. I know there are people who would say we should wait longer, be more practical. But I also know that I love you more than I have ever loved anyone. I know that I want to spend every day of the rest of my life making you happy. And I know that when something is right, you should not let fear or convention stand in the way." He released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "This was my grandmother's ring. My mother sent it to me last month, saying she knew I would find the right woman eventually." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small sapphire. It is not fancy, but it is real, and it has been worn by women who believed in love and family. Tears streamed down Marguerite's face as Ethan lowered himself to one knee. "Marguerite, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here in Sweetwater, raise a family, grow old together?" "Yes," she said, the word coming out as a sob. "Yes, of course, yes." He stood and slipped the ring on her finger, and then they were kissing, holding each other as if afraid to let go. Around them, the night seemed to hold its breath, the stars witness to their promise. When they finally pulled apart, Marguerite looked down at the ring on her finger, the sapphire catching the moonlight. "It is perfect," she said. "You are perfect." "Not even close," Ethan said, laughing, "but I will spend my life trying to be worthy of you." They walked back to the church hand in hand, and the moment they entered, someone noticed the ring. Within minutes, the entire gathering knew that Ethan James and Marguerite Vale were engaged. Congratulations poured in from all sides. Dorothy cried happy tears and hugged them both. Jacob Carmichael clapped Ethan on the back and told him to take whatever time he needed to prepare for the wedding. Even Mrs. Patterson declared it the most romantic proposal she had ever heard of. That night, as Marguerite lay in her bed at the boarding house, she stared at the ring on her finger and marveled at how much her life had changed. 4 months ago, she had been a frightened woman fleeing across dangerous territory, disguised as a nun to survive. Now she was engaged to a wonderful man, part of a loving community, with a future bright with promise. The irony was not lost on her. She had pretended to be a bride of Christ, and in doing so had found her actual place in the world. The deception that had once made her feel guilty now seemed like providence, the necessary step that had brought her to Ethan. She thought of him now, probably lying awake in his own room thinking of her. The knowledge that she was loved, truly and completely loved, was a gift beyond measure. And she would spend her life honoring that gift, building a marriage based on the trust and honesty they had shown each other from the beginning. Well, almost from the beginning. She smiled, remembering how he had seen through her disguise immediately but had kept her secret. He had protected her not because she was a nun, but because she was a woman in need. And in protecting her, he had won her heart completely. The wedding was planned for early November, giving them just over a month to prepare. Dorothy threw herself into the arrangements with the enthusiasm of a general planning a campaign. The dress was ordered from a seamstress in Austin. The church was reserved. The whole town was invited. Ethan moved into the foreman's cabin at the Carmichael Ranch, spending his days preparing it for his bride. He repaired the roof, replaced the windows, and built new furniture to supplement the basic pieces already there. Jacob's wife, Elizabeth, helped him choose curtains and linens, amused by his nervous determination to make everything perfect. "She will love it," Elizabeth assured him one afternoon as he fretted over the placement of the stove. "You could give her a tent and she would be happy as long as you were in it." "I want her to have a real home," Ethan insisted. "She has been through so much. She deserves beauty and comfort, and she will have both because she will have you." Elizabeth patted his shoulder. "You are a good man, Ethan James. Marguerite is lucky to have found you." "I am the lucky one," he said simply. In town, Marguerite helped Dorothy manage the increased business at the boarding house while also preparing for her new life. She learned to can vegetables from Mrs. Morrison, studied basic ranching from Jacob's wife, and practiced her cooking under Dorothy's patient instruction. The ladies of the church, led by Mrs. Patterson, threw her a wedding shower filled with practical gifts and warm wishes. Marguerite accepted quilts, kitchen utensils, and sage advice with equal gratitude. These women, most of whom had been strangers just a few months ago, had become her friends and mentors. "You have done well for yourself," Mrs. Patterson told her as the party wound down. "Ethan James is one of the good ones. Steady, hardworking, honest. Those qualities will serve you well over the years." "I know," Marguerite said. "I feel blessed beyond measure." "As you should. But remember, marriage is work. The romance and excitement fade, and then you are left with the daily business of building a life together. That is when character matters most." Marguerite thought about those words often in the days that followed. She had no illusions about marriage being easy. She had seen her parents struggle through difficult times, had watched them choose each other day after day even when it would have been easier to walk away. That was the kind of marriage she wanted with Ethan, not just passion and romance, but partnership and commitment. 2 weeks before the wedding, a letter arrived at the boarding house that sent shockwaves through Marguerite's heart. It was from Father Miguel at the mission, and it contained disturbing news. "My dear Miss Vale," the letter read, "I hope this finds you well and safely arrived in Sweetwater. I write with troubling information. A man came to the mission last week, asking about a young woman who might have passed through dressed as a nun. He claimed to be your uncle, seeking to reunite with family, but something about him struck me as false. He was too insistent, too aggressive in his questioning. I told him nothing, but I fear he may attempt to find you. Please be cautious and know that my prayers are with you. Father Miguel." Marguerite's hands shook as she read the letter a second time. An uncle. She had no uncles, no family beyond Dorothy. Who could be looking for her and why? She showed the letter to Dorothy immediately and her aunt's face grew grave. "This is not good. Who would be hunting for you?" "I do not know," Marguerite said, her old fear returning. "The bandits on the first stage, they never saw me. I was hidden the entire time. And the ones who attacked our stage on the way here, they were just random criminals. Why would anyone be specifically looking for me? We need to tell Ethan," Dorothy decided, "and perhaps the sheriff. If someone is searching for you, we need to be prepared." Ethan arrived within an hour of Dorothy sending for him, and his face darkened as he read Father Miguel's letter. "I do not like this," he said. "The timing is too coincidental. An attack on your first stage and now someone claiming to be family but acting suspiciously." Sheriff Tom Hendricks, a weathered man in his 50s, listened to the story with a frown. "Could be nothing," he said finally. "Could be someone who really is family going about it the wrong way. But given what happened to Miss Vale, I agree we should be cautious." He looked at Ethan. "You planning to keep her close until the wedding?" "Every moment I can," Ethan confirmed. "Good. And after the wedding, she will be at the Carmichael place, which has plenty of hands if trouble shows up. Still, I will ask around, see if any strangers have been in town asking questions." The news cast a shadow over the final preparations, but Marguerite refused to let fear control her again. She had survived too much, come too far, to let an unnamed threat derail her happiness. Still, she found herself looking over her shoulder more often, jumping at unexpected sounds. Ethan stayed close, his protective instincts heightened. He arranged his work so he could be in town each evening, and he walked Marguerite everywhere she needed to go. At night, he checked the boarding house's locks and made sure Dorothy knew how to use the rifle he had left with her. "I will not let anything happen to you," he told Marguerite one evening as they sat in the parlor. "Whatever this is, whoever is looking for you, they will have to go through me first. I hate that you have to worry about this," she said. "Our wedding should be a happy time, not filled with fear." "Our wedding will be perfect," he assured her. "And once we are married, once you are Marguerite James living on the Carmichael Ranch, whoever is looking for Marguerite Vale will have a much harder time finding you." It was a practical point, and it brought her some comfort. Still, the mystery gnawed at her. Who could be looking for her and why? She had done nothing wrong, had no enemies that she knew of, unless... A thought struck her, chilling in its implications. The first stage had been attacked, everyone killed, but what if she had not been the only survivor? What if someone else had escaped, someone who now wanted to ensure there were no witnesses to whatever had really happened? She shared this theory with Ethan, and his expression grew grim. If that is the case, then we are dealing with someone dangerous, someone who has already proven willing to kill. He took her hands. Marguerite, I need you to promise me something. Until we figure this out, do not go anywhere alone. Always have someone with you, preferably someone armed. Can you do that? Yes, she said, though the restriction chafed. She had just begun to feel free to enjoy her independence. Now it was being taken away again. The wedding day arrived cold and clear, the first hint of winter in the air. Despite the underlying tension, the ceremony was beautiful. The church was packed with well-wishers. Marguerite wore her white dress with a simple veil, and Ethan stood at the altar looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. Dorothy walked her down the aisle, tears streaming down her face. As Marguerite joined Ethan before the minister, she felt the rightness of the moment settling over her like a blessing. This was meant to be. Whatever troubles lay ahead, they would face them together. Dearly beloved, the minister began, and Marguerite focused on Ethan's face, on the love she saw shining in his gray-blue eyes. They spoke their vows clearly, their voices steady despite the emotion. When Ethan slipped the wedding band onto her finger, joining the engagement ring already there, Marguerite felt tears slip down her cheeks. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Ethan kissed her before the entire congregation, she knew that she was finally, truly home. The reception was held in the church hall, with food and music and dancing. Jacob Carmichael gave a toast praising Ethan's character and welcoming Marguerite to the ranch community. Dorothy spoke tearfully about finding family and love in unexpected places. And through it all, Ethan and Marguerite stayed close, their hands constantly touching, their eyes meeting across the crowd. As evening fell and the party began to wind down, Ethan and Marguerite prepared to leave for the ranch. A wagon waited outside, decorated with ribbons and filled with their belongings. Friends and neighbors lined up to say goodbye, offering final congratulations and well wishes. They were climbing into the wagon when Sheriff Hendricks approached, his expression serious. "Ethan, a word." Ethan helped Marguerite onto the seat and then stepped aside with the sheriff. Marguerite could not hear their conversation, but she saw Ethan's jaw tighten, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun belt before remembering he had removed it for the wedding. When he returned to the wagon, his face was carefully neutral, but Marguerite knew him well enough now to read the tension in his shoulders. "What is wrong?" she asked as he took up the reins. "Nothing that cannot wait until tomorrow," he said, urging the horses forward. "Tonight is about us, about beginning our life together. Everything else can wait." But as they drove through the darkening streets toward the ranch, Marguerite saw how his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, how his body remained alert despite his attempt at casual conversation. Whatever the sheriff had told him, it was serious. The cabin at the Carmichael Ranch was small but beautifully appointed, with lace curtains in the windows and a fire already burning in the hearth. Elizabeth Carmichael had clearly been there, leaving fresh flowers on the table and a meal keeping warm on the stove. Ethan carried Marguerite over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. Inside, they stood together in the firelight, suddenly shy with each other despite the months of courtship. "Welcome home, Mrs. James," Ethan said softly. "It feels strange being called that," Marguerite admitted, "but wonderful too." They ate the meal Elizabeth had left, though neither was very hungry. They talked about the ceremony, about who had attended, about the gifts they had received. And slowly, the tension that had gripped Ethan since his conversation with the sheriff began to ease. Later, as they prepared for bed, Marguerite said, "Will you tell me now what the sheriff said? I know something is wrong." Ethan sighed, knowing she would not let it rest. A stranger was seen in town yesterday. A man, well-dressed, asking questions about a young woman who came to Sweetwater a few months ago. When the person he asked could not help, he became aggressive. "The sheriff wants me to be extra cautious, keep you close." Fear flickered through Marguerite, but she pushed it down. "Then we will be cautious. But I refuse to let whoever this is ruin our wedding night. We have waited so long for this, fought so hard to be together. Tonight we focus on us." "You are right," Ethan said, pulling her into his arms. "Tonight is ours. Everything else can wait." They made love for the first time as husband and wife, tender and passionate. And when they finally slept, wrapped in each other's arms, both felt the bone-deep certainty that they had found their place in the world. The next morning brought reality crashing back. Ethan woke before dawn and dressed quietly, not wanting to disturb Marguerite. He needed to check in with Jacob, discuss work assignments for the day. But more importantly, he wanted to talk to the hands, make sure they were aware of the potential threat. When he stepped outside, the sun was just beginning to paint the horizon pink and gold. The ranch was coming to life, men moving about their morning tasks. Jacob stood near the barn, talking to his head wrangler. "Morning," Jacob said as Ethan approached. "How is married life treating you?" "Pretty well so far," Ethan said with a smile. Then his expression sobered. "Did the sheriff talk to you about the stranger in town?" "He did. I have already alerted the men. Anyone who does not belong here will be questioned and escorted off the property." Jacob paused. "Any idea who this man might be or what he wants?" "None. Marguerite has no enemies that she knows of. Her parents are dead and Dorothy is her only living relative. It makes no sense." "Well, whoever he is, he will not get near your wife, I promise you that." The words were reassuring, but Ethan could not shake the feeling that something bad was coming. He had learned to trust his instincts over the years on the frontier, and those instincts were screaming at him now. He returned to the cabin to find Marguerite awake and preparing breakfast. She smiled when she saw him, and the normalcy of the moment of his wife cooking in their home made his chest tight with emotion. "I could get used to this," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "As could I." She leaned back against him. "Though I confess I am not sure what to do with myself all day while you are working. I am used to staying busy." Elizabeth said she would stop by later, show you around the ranch properly. "And there is plenty to do here, setting up our home the way you want it." He hesitated, then added, "But Marguerite, I need you to promise me something. Until we figure out who is looking for you, do not leave the cabin alone. If you want to go somewhere, get me or one of the other hands to escort you." Her smile faded. "You are really worried about this?" "I am. I cannot shake the feeling that something is wrong, and I would rather be overly cautious than have something happen to you." "All right," she agreed. "I will be careful, I promise." They spent the morning together before Ethan had to leave for work. Marguerite explored the cabin, putting away the gifts from the wedding, arranging their few possessions to make the space feel like home. It was smaller than what she had grown up with in Philadelphia, but it was theirs, and that made it precious. Elizabeth arrived around noon with a basket of fresh bread and preserves. "Thought you might need some supplies," she said cheerfully. "And I wanted to officially welcome you to ranch life." The two women sat at the small table, and Elizabeth explained the rhythms of ranch living, the responsibilities and challenges. She was warm and practical, and Marguerite found herself relaxing in her company. "Ethan is a good man," Elizabeth said at one point. We are glad to have him as foreman, but more than that, we are glad he found you. He has seemed lonely these past few years, like he was waiting for something. Now I see he was waiting for you." "I feel the same way," Marguerite admitted. "Like my whole life was leading me to him. Even the terrible parts, the stage attack and having to disguise myself, all of it brought me here." They were laughing over a story Elizabeth was telling about Jacob's failed attempts at cooking when they heard horses approaching at speed. Both women tensed, and Elizabeth moved to the window. "Riders coming hard," she said. "3 of them." Marguerite joined her at the window, her heart pounding. The riders were strangers, and even from a distance she could see they were armed and moving with purpose. "Stay here," Elizabeth ordered, grabbing a rifle from the rack near the door. "I will see what they want." But Marguerite could not stay inside, could not hide while Elizabeth faced potential danger alone. She followed the older woman outside, staying close to the cabin wall. The riders pulled up in the yard, dust billowing around their horses. The leader was a hard-looking man in his 40s, with cold eyes and a scarred face. He looked at Elizabeth and Marguerite with an expression that made Marguerite's blood run cold. "Looking for a woman," he said without preamble. "Young, red hair, green eyes. Came to this territory a few months back. Heard she might be at this ranch." "You heard wrong," Elizabeth said firmly. "There is no one here matching that description." The man's eyes moved to Marguerite, and she saw recognition dawn. "That her," he said, pointing. "That is the woman." Before anyone could react, he had drawn his gun, the barrel aimed directly at Marguerite's chest. "You are coming with us, Miss Vale. You have caused us a lot of trouble." Marguerite's mind raced. Who was this man? What did he want? But before she could speak, gunfire erupted from near the barn. The ranch hands, alerted by the commotion, had taken defensive positions. The scarred man cursed and wheeled his horse around, his companions doing the same. "This is not over," he shouted. "You cannot hide forever." They thundered away, leaving chaos in their wake. Elizabeth grabbed Marguerite's arm, pulling her back into the cabin. "Stay down," she ordered, positioning herself at the window with the rifle. Minutes later, Ethan burst through the door, his face white with fear. "Marguerite, are you hurt?" "No, I am fine." She threw herself into his arms, shaking. "But those men, they knew who I was. They called me Miss Vale. They said I had caused them trouble." Ethan held her tightly, his mind working through the implications. "You were right," he said grimly. "They are survivors from the first attack or connected to it somehow, and they think you can identify them. But I cannot. I never saw their faces. They do not know that. To them, you are a loose end that needs to be eliminated." Jacob arrived with several of his hands, all armed. "They headed south," he reported. "I sent 2 men to track them, but I do not think they will go far. They will be back." "We need to get Marguerite somewhere safe," Ethan said. "Somewhere they cannot find her." "No," Marguerite said firmly. "I will not run again. I will not let them chase me away from our home, our life. We need to end this." "How?" Ethan demanded. "We do not even know who they are or what they really want. Then we find out." She pulled away from him, her fear transforming into determination. The first stage was attacked outside San Antonio. There must have been an investigation, witnesses, something. If we can figure out who those bandits were, we can understand why they are after me. Sheriff Hendricks agreed to help when they brought the problem to him that evening. "I will wire the authorities in San Antonio, see what I can find out about that stage attack. In the meantime, Mrs. James, you should stay at the boarding house in town. More people around, harder for them to get to you." "I want her at the ranch," Ethan argued. "More open space, easier to see them coming." "And easier for them to set up an ambush," the sheriff countered. "In town, they have to be more careful, too many witnesses." After much debate, they compromised. Marguerite would stay at the boarding house during the day when Ethan was working, but he would bring her back to the ranch at night. It was not perfect, but it gave them options and flexibility. Dorothy welcomed Marguerite back with relief and anger. "Who are these men?" she demanded. "What do they want with my niece?" "We are trying to figure that out," Ethan said. He spent that night at the boarding house, sleeping in a chair in Marguerite's old room, his gun in his lap. The answer came 3 days later via telegram from San Antonio. Sheriff Hendricks read it aloud in his office, Ethan and Marguerite present. "Says here the stage was carrying a strongbox with $20,000, payment for a land deal. The bandits got away with it, but one of them was shot during the attack. His body was found a mile from the scene. Name was William Crenshaw, known associate of the Dalton Gang." "The Dalton Gang," Ethan repeated. "They operate all through this territory, robbing, killing. If they think Marguerite can identify them, they will not stop until she is dead," the sheriff finished grimly. "And they have the resources to keep coming." Marguerite sat very still, processing this information. "So what do we do? How do we stop them?" "We need to make them believe you are not a threat," the sheriff said. "Convince them you cannot identify anyone." "How do we do that?" "By making you visible public. If you are dead, you cannot testify. But if you are alive and clearly have not identified anyone to the law, then killing you serves no purpose. It just brings more attention to them." It was a risky plan, but the only one that made sense. Over the next week, Marguerite made a point of being seen around town, living her normal life. She helped Dorothy at the boarding house. She attended church. She went to the general store, and everywhere she went, Ethan was nearby, watching, protecting. The message they were sending was clear. Marguerite James was just a young woman trying to build a life. She was no threat to anyone. 2 weeks after the confrontation at the ranch, a stranger rode into Sweetwater. He was well-dressed, with the look of a businessman rather than a bandit. He asked to speak with Marguerite, and Sheriff Hendricks arranged a meeting in his office with Ethan and several deputies present. "Mrs. James," the man said politely, "my name is Thomas Dalton. I believe you may have heard of my family." Marguerite's blood ran cold, but she kept her voice steady. "I have heard the name. I am here to resolve a misunderstanding. My associates, they seem to believe you witnessed something that could cause trouble for our business operations. I am here to ascertain the truth of that." "I witnessed a brutal attack that killed innocent people," Marguerite said, her anger overcoming her fear. "But I did not see the faces of the men who did it. I was hidden, terrified. I cannot identify anyone." Thomas studied her carefully. "You understand, Mrs. James, that if you are lying, if you go to the law with information about our operation, there will be consequences." "I am not lying," she said firmly, "and I have no interest in your operation or your gang. I just want to live my life in peace with my husband. Then we have an understanding." Thomas stood, tipping his hat. "I apologize for the distress my associates have caused you. They were overzealous in their concerns. You will not be bothered again." After he left, Marguerite sagged in her chair, the adrenaline draining away. "Is it really over?" she asked. "I think so," Sheriff Hendricks said. "Dalton is the brains of that gang. If he has given his word, the others will fall in line. They know killing you now would bring down the full weight of the law." Ethan pulled Marguerite into his arms, holding her as if he would never let go. "It is over," he whispered. "Finally, it is over." As they walked back to the boarding house to collect Marguerite's things, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The fear that had shadowed her since the stage attack, that had driven her to disguise herself as a nun, that had threatened her new life, was finally gone. "I want to go home," she said to Ethan. "To our cabin. I want to start our real life together without fear, without hiding." "Then that is exactly what we will do." Life at the Carmichael Ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm over the following months. Ethan worked long days as foreman, managing the hands and overseeing the ranch's operations. Marguerite transformed their cabin into a real home, planting a garden in the spring, sewing curtains and quilts, learning to cook the hearty meals that frontier life required. Elizabeth Carmichael became a close friend, teaching Marguerite the skills she needed to thrive in this new life. Together they canned vegetables, rendered soap, and tended to the sick calves that always seemed to appear in the spring. Marguerite discovered she had a knack for ranch work, especially with the horses. "You are a natural," Ethan said one evening, watching her gentle a skittish mare. "Maybe we should start breeding horses when we get our own place." "Our own place?" Marguerite turned to look at him. "You want to leave the Carmichael Ranch, eventually. Not anytime soon, but someday. I want to build something that is ours, that we can pass down to our children." Children. The word hung in the air between them, full of promise. They had talked about starting a family, but so far, it had not happened. Marguerite sometimes worried that the stress of everything she had been through had affected her ability to conceive, but Elizabeth assured her it just took time. That summer, Dorothy came to visit, staying for a week at the cabin. She marveled at how Marguerite had adapted to ranch life, how happy and healthy she looked. "You have found your place," Dorothy said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Your parents would be so proud of you." "I think of them often," Marguerite admitted. "I wish they could have met Ethan, seen this life I have built, but I think they would approve." "They absolutely would. You have shown tremendous courage, tremendous strength. And you have found a good man who loves you completely." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Ethan appeared, riding in from the day's work. He dismounted and climbed the porch steps, kissing Marguerite in greeting. It was such a natural, comfortable gesture, speaking of a marriage built on genuine affection. Dorothy left at the end of the week, satisfied that her niece was thriving. And life continued its steady pace through the summer and into the fall. It was in October, just over a year after their wedding, that Marguerite woke feeling nauseous. At first, she thought it was something she had eaten, but when the feeling persisted for several days, Elizabeth took her aside. "How long since your last monthly?" Elizabeth asked gently. Marguerite counted back and felt her heart skip. 6 weeks, maybe 7. I have been so busy I did not notice." She looked at Elizabeth with wide eyes. "Do you think?" "I think you might be expecting," Elizabeth said with a smile. "We should have the doctor confirm it, but the signs are there." Dr. Morrison, who made regular rounds to the ranch, confirmed the pregnancy 2 days later. "You are definitely with child, Mrs. James. Due in May, I would estimate." Marguerite could barely contain her joy as she waited for Ethan to come home that evening. She had prepared his favorite meal and wore her best dress, wanting everything to be perfect for this moment. When he walked in, tired and dusty from a long day, his face transformed when he saw her. "What is the occasion?" he asked. "Sit down," she said, guiding him to a chair. "I have news." She watched his face as she told him, watched the confusion give way to understanding and then pure joy. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are having a baby in May," she confirmed. He stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "This is the best news," he said. "The absolute best news. I love you so much, Marguerite." "I love you too," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We are going to be a family." That winter was hard as Texas winters could be, but Marguerite barely noticed the cold. She was too busy preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, helping Ethan build a cradle. Her pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as her belly grew, so did Ethan's protective instincts. "You should not be doing that," he would say whenever he caught her doing anything he deemed too strenuous. It was both endearing and frustrating, and they argued good-naturedly about what she could and could not do. Dorothy came to stay when Marguerite entered her 8th month, wanting to be there for the birth. The three of them, Ethan, Marguerite, and Dorothy, formed a tight unit, supporting each other through the waiting. The baby came on a warm evening in May after a labor that lasted most of the day. Dr. Morrison and Elizabeth attended the birth, with Ethan pacing outside until Dorothy finally called him in. "You have a son," Marguerite said weakly, holding the small bundle to her chest. "A beautiful, perfect son." Ethan approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny face. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were gray-blue, just like his father's. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered. "You are both perfect." They named him Thomas after Ethan's father, and he became the center of their world. Ethan proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Marguerite for feeding, walking the floor when Thomas was fussy, singing softly to help him sleep. Watching her husband with their son, Marguerite felt her heart could not possibly hold more love. This man, who had saved her life, who had seen through her disguise and kept her secret, who had loved her despite knowing almost nothing about her, was now the father of her child. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the Carmichael Ranch prospered, and so did Ethan's reputation. Jacob offered to make him a partner in the operation, recognizing his skill and dedication. It was an opportunity that would provide real security for his growing family. When Thomas was 2, Marguerite discovered she was expecting again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and she spent much of it resting. But when their daughter arrived in the spring, small and fierce with her mother's red hair and green eyes, they knew she was worth every difficult moment. They named her Dorothy, after her great-aunt, who cried when she heard. Young Dorothy proved to have her mother's spirit and her father's steadiness, a combination that promised much for her future. By the time Thomas was 5 and Dorothy 3, Ethan and Marguerite had saved enough to buy a small piece of land adjacent to the Carmichael Ranch. It was only 100 acres, but it was theirs, and they began the process of building their own home, their own operation. The house rose slowly over the course of a year, with help from friends and neighbors. It was modest but sturdy, with room for their growing family and the children they hoped would come. When they finally moved in, Marguerite stood on the porch looking out over their land and felt a sense of completion. "Happy?" Ethan asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Beyond measure," she said. "When I think back to that frightened girl disguised as a nun, desperately trying to reach Sweetwater, I can hardly believe this is the same life." "It is not the same life," Ethan said. "That was survival. This is living." Over the following years, they added 2 more children to their family. Another son they named Jacob, and finally a daughter named Elizabeth, after the friends who had welcomed them into the ranch community. Their home was filled with noise and laughter, with the daily chaos of raising children and running a small ranch. Marguerite had proven to be right about their talent with horses. The James Ranch became known for breeding quality stock, horses that were smart and steady. Buyers came from across the territory, and their operation grew profitable. But it was not the success or the prosperity that mattered most to Marguerite. It was the life they had built together, the family they had created. Every evening when Ethan came in from work, and their children rushed to greet him, when they sat down to dinner together in the home they had built, she felt blessed beyond measure. Sometimes, lying in bed at night with Ethan's arms around her, she would think back to that terrifying journey across the territory. She would remember the stage attack, the fear, the desperate decision to disguise herself. And she would remember the moment Ethan had looked at her at that way station, had seen through her disguise, and had chosen to protect her anyway. "You ever regret it?" she asked him one night. "Taking a chance on a woman disguised as a nun?" "You had no idea who I really was or what trouble I might bring." "Not for a single moment," he said without hesitation. "You were mine from that first moment. I knew it even if you did not, and everything since has only confirmed it. I love you," she said simply. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," he replied. "You gave me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. You are my whole world, Marguerite James." As the years passed, their children grew. Thomas proved to have his father's way with horses and his mother's head for business. By the time he was 18, he was running much of the daily operation of the ranch. Dorothy followed her mother's independent spirit, becoming a teacher in Sweetwater, earning her own reputation for intelligence and determination. Jacob and Elizabeth, the younger two, were still finding their paths, but they had time. The James family had built something solid, something that would last. When Marguerite was 40, Dorothy Vale passed away peacefully in her sleep at the boarding house. It was a loss that hit Marguerite hard, but she found comfort in knowing her Anne had lived a full life and had been happy to the end. At the funeral, Marguerite stood between Ethan and her children, looking at the faces of the community that had gathered to pay respects. These people who had been strangers when she arrived were now family. They had shared joys and sorrows, celebrated births and mourned deaths, helped each other through hard times. "She would be proud of you," Ethan said quietly. "Of everything you have built, the woman you have become." "She was proud," Marguerite said. "She told me so many times. I just wish I had told her more often how much she meant to me, how grateful I was that she took me in." "She knew," Ethan assured her. "Love does not need constant words. It shows in actions in the life you live. And your life is a testament to everything Dorothy believed in: family, community, perseverance." As they walked back to their wagon after the funeral, Marguerite looked at the town that had become her home. Sweetwater had grown over the years, new buildings and new families, but the heart of it remained the same. It was a place where people looked out for each other, where strangers became friends, where a woman fleeing danger could find safety and love. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, and they started their own family. Dorothy remained independent, though she eventually fell in love with the new doctor who came to Sweetwater, a kind man who appreciated her fierce intelligence. Jacob took over the day-to-day running of the James Ranch, showing the same steady competence his father had. And Elizabeth, the baby of the family, surprised everyone by deciding to attend a teacher's college in Austin, the first in the family to pursue higher education. Ethan and Marguerite, now in their 50s, found themselves with an empty nest for the first time in decades. It was strange and a little sad, but also peaceful. They had time for each other again, time to sit on their porch in the evenings and watch the sunset, to ride out across their land and simply enjoy being together. "You remember that first night at the boarding house?" Marguerite asked one evening. "When you came to my table and told me you knew I was not a nun." "I remember being terrified you would panic and run," Ethan said with a laugh. "And I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even in that ridiculous habit." "It was not ridiculous," she protested. "It saved my life." "It brought you to me," he corrected. "That is what saved your life, that and your own courage." "We saved each other," Marguerite said. "You gave me safety, a place to belong. But I gave you a family, a reason to build something permanent. You did, he agreed. You gave me everything. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren. The James Ranch had grown to over 500 acres, a successful operation that provided well for the family. But more than the material success, they had built a legacy of love and commitment, of choosing each other every day through good times and bad. At the party, Thomas stood to give a toast. "My parents' story," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "is one of the most romantic I know. My mother, fleeing danger, disguised herself as a nun to cross dangerous territory. My father, who saw through the disguise immediately, kept her secret and protected her. From that unlikely beginning grew one of the strongest marriages I have ever witnessed." He raised his glass. "To Ethan and Marguerite James, who proved that love can bloom even in the hardest soil, and that commitment and partnership can weather any storm. May we all be so fortunate in our own lives." As everyone drank the toast, Marguerite felt tears on her cheeks. She looked around at the faces of her children, her grandchildren, her friends, and felt overwhelming gratitude. This life, this beautiful, full life, had all begun with a desperate decision to disguise herself and a cowboy who had chosen to protect her. Years later, when they were both in their 70s, Ethan's health began to fail. He had worked hard his entire life, and his body was simply wearing out. Marguerite tended to him with the same devotion he had always shown her, refusing to let him apologize for being a burden. "You are not a burden," she would say firmly. "You are my husband, my partner, my whole heart. Taking care of you is a privilege, not a burden." On a warm spring evening, with the windows open and the smell of blooming flowers drifting through the house, Ethan called his family together. They gathered around his bed, children and grandchildren, knowing this was likely goodbye. "I have had a good life," Ethan said, his voice weak but clear. "Better than I ever imagined possible. And it is all because of your mother, your grandmother. She gave me everything that mattered." He looked at Marguerite, his eyes still holding that same love she had seen all those years ago. "I love you, Maggie. From that first moment until this last, you have been my everything. And you are mine," she said, holding his hand tightly, "always and forever." He died peacefully that night with Marguerite beside him. The grief was sharp and deep, the loss of her partner of over 50 years leaving a hole nothing could fill. But she did not regret a single moment. They had lived fully, loved completely, and built something that would endure. At his funeral, the church could not hold all the people who came to pay respects. Ethan James had been a good man, respected and loved, and the community turned out to honor him. Marguerite sat in the front pew, surrounded by her children, and listened to the stories people told about her husband. They spoke of his fairness, his integrity, his skill with horses. They talked about his generosity, how he had helped young ranchers get started, how he had been there for neighbors in times of trouble. And many mentioned his devotion to his wife, how he had looked at her until the end with the same love and wonder he had shown from the beginning. After the funeral, as people were leaving, Sheriff Tom Hendricks's grandson, now the sheriff himself, approached Marguerite. "Mrs. James, I wanted you to know something. My grandfather told me the story of how you came to Sweetwater, about the disguise and the danger you faced. He said your husband was the bravest man he ever knew, not because of any gunfight or confrontation, but because he chose to protect you when he had no obligation to do so. That kind of courage, the courage to do right simply because it is right, that is rare. Your husband was a rare man." "He was," Marguerite agreed. "The very best of men." Marguerite lived another 5 years, long enough to see Jacob's children grown and Thomas become a grandfather himself. She spent her final years surrounded by family, still sharp and engaged, still telling stories about the old days. She particularly loved telling the grandchildren about how she had met their grandfather, about the nun's habit and the dangerous journey and the cowboy who had seen through her disguise. The children would listen wide-eyed, asking questions, wanting to hear every detail. Was it scary? One of her great-grandchildren asked, pretending to be something you were not. It was terrifying, Marguerite admitted. But sometimes we do what we must to survive. The important thing is that I met your grandfather because of it, and that made everything worthwhile. On a crisp autumn evening, much like the one when she had first arrived in Sweetwater so many decades ago, Marguerite passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was buried next to Ethan on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, with a simple headstone that read, Marguerite James. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She found her home. At her funeral, the church was again packed to overflowing. 3 generations of James' descendants were there, along with countless friends and community members, whose lives had been touched by the remarkable woman who had once fled across dangerous territory, disguised as a nun. Thomas stood to give the eulogy, his voice strong despite his grief. My mother's story, he began, is one of courage, love, and the power of second chances. She came to this territory running for her life, alone and afraid. But she found safety, she found community, and she found a love that lasted a lifetime. He looked out at the gathered crowd. She used to tell us that the best decisions are often made in the worst moments. Her decision to disguise herself as a nun, to keep moving forward despite her fear, brought her to Sweetwater. And my father's decision to protect her, to keep her secret, began one of the great love stories I have had the privilege to witness. They built a life together from almost nothing. They raised a family, created a successful ranch, and touched countless lives. But more than any material success, they showed us what true partnership looks like. They chose each other every single day for over 50 years. That is the legacy they leave us, not land or money, but the example of a love that endured. As Thomas sat down, the congregation sang one of Marguerite's favorite hymns, and as the voices rose together, there was a sense of celebration mixed with the sorrow. Marguerite James had lived a full, rich life. She had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. She had faced danger and emerged stronger. She had built something lasting. In the years that followed, the James Ranch continued to prosper under Jacob's management. The family remained close, gathering for holidays and celebrations, sharing stories about Ethan and Marguerite. The legend of the woman who pretended to be a nun and the cowboy who kept her secret became a favorite tale, passed down through generations. Young girls in the family would hear the story and dream of their own romantic adventures. Young boys would imagine themselves as brave as their great-grandfather, protecting those who needed it. And slowly, over time, the story took on the quality of myth, a perfect romance from the wild days of the Texas frontier. But for those who had known Ethan and Marguerite personally, who had witnessed their marriage, the truth was even better than the myth. They had not been perfect people. They had argued sometimes, struggled with the challenges of life, faced disappointments and setbacks. But through it all, they had remained committed to each other, partners in the truest sense. The cabin where they had started their married life still stood on the Carmichael Ranch, maintained now as a historic site. Visitors would come to see where the famous love story had begun, to stand in the small rooms and imagine the young couple starting their life together. And on the hill where Ethan and Marguerite were buried, their graves were never without flowers. Family members made sure of that, wanting to honor the legacy of love and courage that had begun with a frightened woman in a nun's habit. and a cowboy who had chosen to be her protector. The James family ranch remained successful well into the next century, adapting to changing times while maintaining the core values Ethan and Marguerite had established. Hard work, integrity, community, and above all, commitment to family. These principles guided each new generation, a living legacy from two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. In Sweetwater itself, which grew from a small frontier town into a proper city, the story of Ethan and Marguerite James remained a source of pride. It was taught in schools as part of local history. A historical marker was placed at the site where their first home had stood. And every year on the anniversary of their wedding, the town held a celebration honoring their memory and the values they represented. The tale of the woman who pretended to be a nun to cross the territory safely, and the cowboy who knew the truth and kept it, became more than just a family story. It became a symbol of the Wild West itself, of the courage required to survive, of the connections forged in adversity, and of the possibility of finding love even in the harshest circumstances. For Ethan and Marguerite, wherever they were now, together as they had always been, their greatest joy would have been knowing that their love had created not just a family, but a legacy. That the choice Ethan had made to protect a stranger, and the courage Marguerite had shown in accepting help, had rippled out across generations, creating countless lives filled with love and purpose. Their story was complete, a closed circle of love that had begun with a desperate deception and ended with a family legacy that would endure for generations. It was proof that sometimes the most difficult moments lead to the greatest blessings, that courage takes many forms, and that true love, once found, never truly ends. The sun set over the Texas prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, much as it had on that evening so long ago when a frightened young woman in a nun's habit had stepped off a stage in Sweetwater and into the life she was meant to live. And in the gathering twilight, if one listened carefully, they might almost hear the echo of laughter, of whispered promises, of two voices joined in love across the years. Ethan and Marguerite James had found their happy ending, and it was perfect.